A History of Socialist Failure in Pictures.
Socialism as an ideology and a system of government is a failure. This is not a controversial statement to people who experience socialism or who study history with an honest desire to know the truth. But left-wing ideologues neither care about history nor the facts. Truth is reactionary and works against the inevitable socialist utopian future. Socialism comes in more than one flavor, from international socialism and national socialism to short-lived anarchic socialist utopias. They are all directly opposed to the American ideals of private property, individual rights, and limited government.
The European model. The EU is touted as the shining example of socialism, but it is economically crumbling. Youth unemployment in former socialist-run welfare states like Greece and Spain exceed 50%, and the EU average is 22.7%.
The USSR, aka the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Once heralded as a workers' paradise, the communist bloc murdered tens of millions, and devolved into gulags and bread lines. The Soviet Union collapsed after decades of stagnation and corruption beginning in 1989.
Latin American style. Fidel Castro seized control in Cuba in 1959 and sat atop the Cuban pecking order until 2008, turning over control to his brother Raúl Castro in nepotistic fashion. Socialist Venezuelan strongman Hugo Chavez just recently hand-selected his successor Nicolas Maduro.
The Hell States. These worst-case scenarios reflect the coercive collectivist mentality run amok. The police state of North Korea is the most glaring contemporary example. Before that there was Cambodia's Khmer Rouge, whose philosopher King Pol Pot had a motto: to keep you is no benefit. To destroy you is no loss.
The National Socialist German Workers' Party was explicitly anti-capitalist, anti-individualist and rabidly collectivist. It was opposed to the international socialist veneer of the expansionist USSR. Mussolini, who was an international socialist before he was a fascist, or national socialist, once encapsulated coercive collectivism perfectly: all within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state.
Anarchic socialism. On the other end of the socialist spectrum, away from coercive collectivism, is the idealized anarchic socialism best embodied by the Paris Commune. Romanticized in the way today's Occupy movement and hippies are, the spontaneous outbreak of shared property and collective action in Paris 1871 lasted about 10 days. Most other socialist experiments have similar short-lived results.
Early American socialism. Plymouth Plantation is an example of a socialist experiment that went awry. John Winthrop's journal shows that implementing Plato's collectivist principles led to ruinous starvation, whereas applying private property led to plenty and the first Thanksgiving. Particular Native American tribes display that socialist principles in certain situations can have some success, given a homogeneous population, a primitive lifestyle, and a lack of natural resource competition.
Middle Age religious socialism. Although Marxist socialism is directly opposed to religion, as well as the family, there were socialist religious sects directly opposed to private property, a central tenet of Marxism, were anti-materialistic, and promoted all things in common. Examples include the Cathars, Taborites, and Anabaptists.
Ancient world. The Incans, Egyptians, and Sumerians, among other ancient societies, had quasi-socialist caste systems that rationed food and property to workers. There has never been a state of workers, by workers, and for workers without a privileged class administering it. This is a central irony of egalitarian socialism. It inevitably returns modern societies to more stratified and unequal forms.
Progressive America. As welfare spending explodes to unsustainable levels, the U.S. is poised to adopt the European welfare state model that is proving to be untenable. America was already among the most heavily indebted states in the world before it adopted costly state-run health care. It is currently estimated that for every 1.25 private sector worker or producer, there is one government bureaucrat or welfare recipient. Because of the welfare state, it is now more beneficial for a single mom to earn $29,000 and to be on welfare, than it is for her to earn $69,000 and to be taxed.
It is human nature to seek the path of least resistance, and because of this, socialism lowers the citizenry to the least common denominator, rather than lifting people up to be the best they can be. Because of class warfare, as Margaret Thatcher put it, people would rather the poor were poorer, so long as the rich were less rich.
If we measured unemployment the way they did during the 1930s, today's unemployment would be worse than any single year of the Great Depression.
Norman Thomas was a leading American socialist, pacifist and six-time presidential candidate for the Socialist Party of America. The Socialist Party candidate for President of the U.S., Norman Thomas said this in a 1944 speech. The American people will never knowingly adopt socialism. But under the name liberalism, they will adopt every fragment of the socialist program, until one day America will be a socialist nation without knowing how it happened. He went on to say, I no longer need to run as presidential candidate for the Socialist Party. The Democrat Party has adopted our platform. By the way, Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States Sonia Sotomayor, nominated by Obama, had a quote from Norman Thomas in her 1976 Princeton yearbook as if Thomas were her hero. Great, the Ninth Circuit is already a rubber stamp for socialism, not they've got the U.S. Supreme Court.
This is from Sotomayor's yearbook showing the quote from Thomas. How far left has America drifted? JFK, a liberal, would be considered a far-right extremist by today's standards. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. John F. Kennedy. I believe in an America where the free enterprise system flourishes for all other systems to see and admire, where no businessman lacks either competition or credit, and where no monopoly, no racketeer, no government bureaucracy can put him out of business that he built up with his own initiative. John F. Kennedy. In the 60s, 26% of federal spending represented payments for individuals, it's now 70%. Defense was 50% of our budget, it's now 18%.
Norman Thomas got his prediction. Buying votes with your kid's credit card doesn't mean you're the party with a heart.
A democracy is always temporary in nature, it simply cannot exist as a permanent form of government. A democracy will continue to exist up until the time that voters discover they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates who promise the most benefits from the public treasury, with the result that every democracy will finally collapse due to loose fiscal policy, which is always followed by a dictatorship. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations from the beginning of history, has been about 200 years. Alexander Tyler, a Scottish history professor 1787.
To avoid being mistaken for such a sellout, I chose my friends carefully. The more politically active black students, the foreign students, the Chicanos, the Marxist professors and structural feminists and punk rock performance poets.
Hillary Clinton's senior thesis at Wellesley College on Alinsky. As a community organizer in Chicago, Obama gave classes on Alinsky tactics.
Obama with radical bill heirs as late as November 27, 1997. For those who don't know, in 1969 heirs co-founded the Weather Underground, a self-described communist revolutionary group that conducted a campaign of bombing public buildings, including police stations, the U.S. Capitol building, and the Pentagon, during the 1960s and 1970s in response to U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. Can you guess which person was nominated for Time magazine Person of the Year? The Zero who wants other people to pay for her birth control. The heroine who stood against Mexican drug cartels, then was stabbed, bound, tortured, burned and murdered on the third assassination attempt because of it. The teacher who took the bullets for her students at Sandy Hook Elementary School. You guessed it. It was the Zero who wants others to pay for her birth control.
Liberals control, MSNBC, CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, PBS, most magazine and newspapers, Hollywood, cable and network TV. Why are they always whining about Fox News?
A new study from the widely respected National Bureau of Economic Research released this week has confirmed beyond question that the left's race-baiting attacks on the housing market, the Community Reinvestment Act enacted under Carter, made shockingly more aggressive under Clinton, is directly responsible for imploding the housing market and destroying the economy. President Bush went to Congress repeatedly for years warning them that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were going to destroy the economy, 17 times in 2008 alone. Democrats continuously ignored him, shut down his proposals along party lines and continued raiding the institutions for campaign contributions on their way down. John McCain also co-sponsored urgently critical reforms that would have prevented the housing market collapse, but Democrats shut that down as well, along party lines, and even openly ridiculed anyone who suggested reforms were necessary to protect their taxpayer-funded campaign contributions as the economy raced uncontrollably toward the cliff. Non-Fox media have spent years deliberately and relentlessly inoculating people against the facts, training them to mindlessly blame Bush for being in charge when Democrat policies destroyed the economy.
But you're not going to see the collapse that you see when people talk about a bubble. And so those of us on our committee in particular will continue to push for home ownership. Time.
Yes. No, you hit it. 2007. You're the brilliant guy. You're the brilliant guy who presided over the biggest financial collapse in federal history.
No.
I'm the dumb guy.
A society whose citizens refuse to see and investigate the facts, who refuse to believe that their government and their media will routinely lie to them and fabricate a reality contrary to verifiable facts, is a society that chooses and deserves the police state dictatorship it is going to get. Ian Williams Goddard.
Never underestimate the power of stupid people in large groups.
The people will believe what the media tells them they believe. George Orwell. Orwell died in 1950. He wrote Animal Farm and 1984. In Animal Farm his satire of Stalinism is eerily similar to what's happening today. An example, Obamacare doesn't apply to Congress members or unions.
As an example of liberal bias during the Vietnam War, no one had heard of the 7,600 murdered in Hue by Vietnamese communists nor the 3 million massacred when the North took South Vietnam, but everyone had heard of William Calley Jr.
Today we see the same liberal bias on the side of evil.
The press is our chief ideological weapon. Nikita Khrushchev. What good fortune for governments that the people do not think. Adolf Hitler. Stalin and Lenin both used the phrase useful idiots in referring to their supporters.
I don't pay attention to politics is one of the most ignorant statements a person can make.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves. Abraham Lincoln.
You and I have a rendezvous with destiny. We can preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we can sentence this generation of young people to take the first step into 1,000 years of darkness. If we are destined to fail, if this way of ours is to be lost, then at least let our children and our children's children say of us that it didn't fail because we failed to try. Let them say that at least we did all that could be done in the one moment allotted us here on earth.
Don't let a corrupt media and criminal government continue to brainwash you. Think for yourself, America, while you still can.